There is a scene in Limitless where Bradley Cooper takes the pill for the first time. He does not suddenly know things he never knew. He remembers everything he already knew. He accesses it all, simultaneously, instantly, completely. The past 20 years of reading, studying, observing, learning, all of it suddenly available at full resolution, at full speed, with no interference. Watch the expression on his face in that moment. It is not the expression of someone discovering new power. It is the expression of someone who has just had everything taken away that was standing between them and what they already were. That scene resonated with millions of people because it touches something real. Not in the movie, in your life. And that exact failure is happening to you every single session you play. The frustration is not that we do not know enough. It has never been about knowing enough. The frustration is that we cannot access what we know when it matters most. When the pressure is highest, when the money is real, when everything in the environment is working against the quality of our thinking. Every serious poker player knows this feeling, not once. Every session it appears in some form. You review a session and the right play is obvious. The read was there, the range was clear, the fold was correct. You knew all of it. But at the table, under pressure, with money on the line and time running out and an opponent staring at you, something blocked the access. The file was in the system. The retrieval failed. And the worst part is not the lost pot. The worst part is that you knew. In some part of your brain, you knew exactly what the right play was. And something between that knowledge and your action made the wrong one happen instead. Here is the science behind that failure. And here is what no one in poker education is saying clearly enough. NZT does not exist, but the mechanism it represents does. Neuroscience has documented something called transient hypofrontality, a state in which the prefrontal cortex, your analytical decision-making center, operates at its absolute peak efficiency. In this state, your pattern recognition accelerates. Your range analysis runs cleaner. Your emotional interference drops to near zero. Your reads land with a precision that feels almost automatic. Elite poker players are not accessing this state by accident. They are accessing it by design. This video is about that design. Not the pill, the protocol, not the fantasy, the neuroscience. Not what Bradley Cooper experienced in a movie. What Fedor Holtz and every player who has ever described being completely in the zone have experienced in real sessions, with real money, against real opponents. Stay until the end. The final section is the most actionable thing this channel has produced. Not a concept. A system you can implement before your next session and feel the difference in the first 30 minutes. The pill does not exist. What it represents does. Available to you. Right now. With the brain you already have. Before we talk about how to access your full poker brain, you need to understand exactly what is blocking it. Because the block is not what you think it is. It is not lack of knowledge. It is not lack of study. It is a biological conflict that runs in every session and wins far more often than you have ever measured. The prefrontal cortex is the seat of your poker intelligence, range analysis, position adjustments, bet sizing calculations, holding multiple possibilities without collapsing to a premature conclusion. Slow, deliberate, metabolically expensive, and exactly the system your brain deprioritizes when it detects threat. Your amygdala is your survival system. It processes threat, loss, social judgment, and uncertainty. It is fast, dramatically faster than the prefrontal cortex, and it does not care about EV. It cares about ending discomfort, protecting your identity, and under pressure, it fires first. This is the war happening inside your head on every significant decision. You think you are thinking. You are not. You are reacting. The pot is $300. Someone is looking at you. The last hand went badly. Your analytical brain has the correct answer. It takes 2 seconds of clean thinking to produce it. But in those 2 seconds, your amygdala has already fired, already processed the threat, already pushed an emotional response into your motor system. You act before you think. You call when you should fold. You check when you should fire. You abandon the bluff that the math fully supports, and the sensation that accompanied each decision felt like reasoning, like judgment, like the accumulated wisdom of thousands of hours at the table. It was not wisdom. It was interference. This signal distortion, measured in brain imaging studies, tracked across thousands of decisions, is the single most expensive element in your poker game. Not your technical knowledge, not your range understanding, not your bet sizing, the distortion. And here is what makes it truly dangerous. It does not announce itself. It does not feel like interference. It feels like judgment. It feels like experience, like the particular confidence that only comes from thousands of hours at the table. That is the disguise, and it is perfect. Here is the critical insight. The interference is not you. It is not a character flaw. It is a biological protection mechanism, operating on the same hardware your poker intelligence runs on, firing faster than your analytical mind can respond, doing exactly what 200,000 years of evolution designed it to do. You cannot remove it, but you can learn to reduce it, systematically, deliberately, session by session, till your prefrontal cortex stays online long enough to produce the decision your study has already prepared for exactly this moment. That is the entire game, not ranges, not solvers, the ability to deliver what you know when the pressure is highest. In 2004, neuroscientist Arne Dietrich proposed a theory called transient hypofrontality. The name sounds complex. The concept is precise. And for poker players, it is one of the most important pieces of neuroscience you will ever encounter. During flow states, what athletes call being in the zone, what poker players call playing their A game, what the movie Limitless was trying to capture with a pill, specific regions of the prefrontal cortex temporarily downregulate. The inner critic goes quiet. Self-monitoring decreases. The emotional override that normally sits between your analytical thinking and your action drops to near zero. The result is a state where your knowledge and your execution are nearly identical. What you know is what you do. That is the entire problem, stated from the other direction. When you are not in this state, which is most of your sessions, what you know and what you do diverge. That divergence is not variance. It is the gap between your prefrontal output and your actual action, measured in every hand where you knew what you should do and did something else. You have felt this before. One session, maybe two, where everything just worked. The reads felt automatic. The decisions were clean. You sat down for 4 hours and never once questioned a fold or hesitated on a value bet. You finished and thought, that is the player I am. That is who I actually am when the interference stops. That was not luck. That was not confidence. That was your prefrontal cortex operating at its designed capacity with minimal emotional interference, not your average sessions, your real level, transient hypofrontality, the zone, the A game, whatever you call it. It is a neurological state, not a mood. And neurological states can be engineered. This is not theory. You have already experienced this. Here is what the research shows about when flow is most likely to occur. Challenge must match skill. The task must have clear, immediate feedback. The environment must be free of competing attentional demands. And critically, the physiological baseline you bring to the task must be within a specific arousal window. Not too low. Boredom suppresses the prefrontal cortex as surely as anxiety does. Not too high. Excessive stress floods the system with cortisol, which directly impairs prefrontal function. Think about your last session where you played your absolute best. Where were you before you sat down? What was your energy level? Your mental state going into the first hand? Most serious players cannot answer those questions precisely. They know it felt good. They know the reads were landing, but they cannot identify why, which means they cannot recreate the conditions that produced it. So they hope it comes back. It sometimes does, randomly. That is the work, building the map of the conditions that produce your optimal cognitive state, so you can recreate those conditions deliberately, every session. That map is what this video is building toward. And here is what the movie gets wrong, and exactly right. The movie frames NZT as adding capability, the 10% brain myth. The pill unlocks the rest. The neuroscience does not support that. But here is what it does support. You are not operating at a fraction because the capability is locked. You are operating at a fraction because the delivery is blocked. The prefrontal cortex has the analytical firepower. The ranges are encoded. The reads are built. Accessible, under the right conditions. The conditions are the product, not the pill. Neuroimaging studies of skilled poker players show this directly. Elite players demonstrate increased prefrontal activity and decreased amygdala activity compared to novice players facing identical decisions. The technical knowledge base is similar. The neural architecture is different. They trained the system. This is the gap almost no poker education addresses. Ranges, bet sizing, GTO theory, solver work. All of it targets the prefrontal cortex during calm study sessions, when it is already fully online. None of it trains the system to maintain prefrontal dominance when cortisol is elevated, the session has gone wrong, and the emotional system is running fast. You do not need more knowledge. You need a system that lets you use what you already know. That is what the mind of a grinder complete collection is. The gap is not between you and better players. The gap is between the player you are in your best sessions and the player you average across all sessions. That gap is not strategic. It is architectural. And architecture can be built. 10 ebooks. One integrated system. Designed not to add to what you know, but to train the delivery system that makes what you know show up under real pressure. Right now, your best poker brain shows up in roughly 2 out of 10 sessions. With the system, it shows up in 7. Same knowledge, same opponents, same stakes, different architecture, not because you learned anything new, because the delivery system is trained to match the knowledge you already have. 2 players sit down for the same session tonight. One has the collection, one has the recognition, which fades in 20 minutes when the first bad beat arrives and the old programs run. You already know which one ends the session with cleaner decisions. 29.90. Less than 1 buy-in. Less than what one amygdala-driven river call costs you in a session where the interference wins. Collection 2 is launching now. Every Collection 1 buyer receives Book 1 free, directly to their email, already being sent. Because this is a system, and the players inside it receive everything that follows. No countdown, no fake urgency. Link in the pinned comment. When Collection 2 launches as a complete package, Collection 1 closes at this price. And nothing changes if you do not build it. The next session is coming. The question is which version of you shows up. If your best sessions feel random, they are not. They follow a pattern. There are 4 specific conditions that either enable or destroy access to your full poker brain. Understand these, and you understand why the same player can be razor sharp on Tuesday and cognitively compromised on Thursday, with no meaningful difference in strategy knowledge. The zone is not a mood, it is a state. States have deterministic inputs. The first condition is your physiological baseline at the start of the session. The Yerkes-Dodson law, one of the most replicated findings in performance psychology, demonstrates that there is an optimal arousal window for complex cognitive tasks. Too low, the prefrontal cortex is understimulated, focus is diffuse, pattern recognition is slow. Too high, cortisol floods the system, amygdala activity dominates, prefrontal output degrades. Most players sit down wherever they happen to be emotionally. If the commute was stressful, they bring that. If they had an argument before the session, they bring that. If they are tired from insufficient sleep, they bring that. Each of these states shifts the baseline outside the optimal arousal window before the first hand is dealt. The zone becomes statistically unlikely before you look at your first hole cards. The second condition is the first 30 minutes of the session. Your neural state at the 60-minute mark is largely determined by what happened in the first 30. A significant loss in the first 15 minutes floods the system with cortisol and triggers loss aversion responses that compound across every subsequent decision. A significant win in the first 15 minutes triggers dopamine responses that can suppress critical self-evaluation and produce overconfidence cascades. The players who access their full brain most consistently are not the ones who run well early. They are the players who have built systems for maintaining baseline calibration regardless of early results. Systems that decouple their cognitive state from their running results. The third condition is decision interval management. Decision fatigue is real and measurable. Cognitive resources deplete with every decision, not just significant ones. Every trivial decision depletes the same resource pool that precision river decisions require. Elite players manage cognitive load between decisions as deliberately as they manage their chip count. The fourth condition is reset architecture between hands. Between hands is where the session is won or lost, not during hands. Most players never manage this space. They fold, shuffle chips, check their phone. Unmanaged cognitive state, and it accumulates. The player without a reset protocol carries emotional residue from every previous hand into every future decision. Hand 20 carries 20 hands of unprocessed emotional weight. The player with a reset protocol enters each hand with a cleared baseline. The prefrontal cortex starts each new decision without interference from the previous one. Let me show you what accessing your full poker brain actually looks like in practice. Not the dramatic movie version. Not Bradley Cooper suddenly speaking Italian and playing the piano. The real version, which is both more subtle and more powerful than anything the movie depicts. You are in hour 3 of a live cash game session. You are down 1 buy-in from a cooler in hour 2 that you played correctly and lost anyway. A player you have been reading all night has just made an unusual sizing change on the river. A significant deviation from his pattern that your prefrontal cortex has been tracking all session. In an uncalibrated state, baseline not optimized, no reset protocol running, decision fatigue accumulating, emotional residue from the cooler still present. Your brain processes this sizing change through the filter of everything that has happened in the previous 2 hours. The story you built about this player in hour 1, the emotional residue from the pot you lost in hour 2, the vague fatigue that has been building since you sat down, the background calculation of how many buy-ins you are down and how much you need to win this hand. You call. He shows the nuts. You had the information you needed to fold. The sizing told you. Your read told you. You knew. The interference won. Now the same scenario in a calibrated state. Pre-session routine ran. Baseline arousal within the optimal window. Reset protocol has cleared the emotional residue from the cooler in hour 2. Your prefrontal cortex is operating with minimal amygdala interference. The unusual sizing lands differently. It lands as data, not as background noise filtered through 2 hours of accumulated emotional charge. Your pattern recognition runs without the filter of emotional residue. The range analysis completes before the emotional system can produce its preferred conclusion. You see what the action is actually saying, not what you want it to say, not what loss aversion frames as a plausible alternative. What it says, in isolation, as data, you fold. He shows the nuts. You feel nothing. Not pride, not relief, not frustration. Because the decision was clean. The information was processed without interference. The execution matched the analysis with complete fidelity. That is not luck. That is not running good. That is not confidence. That is your prefrontal cortex operating as designed, without interference suppressing the output that your study already prepared for this exact spot. This is what 100% of your poker brain looks like. Not superhuman, not impossible, not a pill. A state of minimal interference between what you know and what you do. Available to you, right now. With the brain you already have. You have been there before, not often enough, not reliably enough. But you have been there. The goal is not to find it again. The goal is to build the conditions that make it the expected outcome, not the exception. There is a concept in flow state research called autotelic experience, from the Greek for self-goal. It describes the state where the activity itself becomes the reward, where external outcomes stop driving the moment-to-moment decision, and where the mind operates in a specific low-interference mode that produces optimal output. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi documented this across surgeons, athletes, musicians, and chess players. The descriptions are remarkably consistent. Time distorts. Self-consciousness decreases. The decision feels obvious before the deliberation completes. The player describes feeling like they could not make a wrong decision. Not because they were playing perfectly, but because the gap between knowledge and execution had temporarily closed. This feeling. The session where you finished and thought, that is who I actually am. You were right. The other sessions, where everything felt difficult, the reads were off, the decisions were slow. Those were not you at your actual level. Those were you operating with signal noise you had not yet learned to reduce. The system reduces it. This is not mystical. It is the transient hypofrontality Dietrich described. The prefrontal cortex running at full capacity with reduced self-monitoring overhead, supported by a neurochemical cocktail of dopamine, norepinephrine, anandamide, and endorphins that the brain produces when challenge precisely matches skill. Every serious poker player has accessed autotelic state. You have been there, in sessions that felt different in a way you could not fully explain, and have never fully replicated. This is not rare, it is just not controlled. Most players accessed it accidentally. They sat down on the right day, with the right baseline, and the conditions happened to align. They attribute it to running well, to being focused, to having a good day. They do not understand it as a neurological state produced by a specific set of conditions that can be deliberately recreated. So they wait for it to happen again. And sometimes it does not. And they have no reliable way to influence which one shows up. The research on flow induction is clear. On one point, almost no poker education addresses. You do not find the zone. You create the conditions under which the zone becomes probable. Clear goals, immediate feedback, challenge matching skill, physiological baseline within the optimal arousal window, and a pre-task ritual that signals to the nervous system. This is the context for high performance. The difference between the poker player who accesses their full brain once a month and the one who accesses it 3 sessions out of 5 is not talent, not running good, not strategy. It is systematic pre-performance architecture applied consistently over time, not the pill, the architecture. That is the work. Here is where most players stop. They hear this framework, they recognize it, they feel the truth of it landing, and then they do nothing with it, not because they are lazy, because the space between understanding a system and implementing one is where most good intentions die. The implementation gap is the most expensive gap in poker. Strategic leaks cost you money in specific spots. The implementation gap costs you your best brain in every spot. For the entire session, every session you sit down without a calibrated system. More expensive than any strategic leak. More expensive than any range mistake. Because strategic leaks cost you money in specific spots. The implementation gap costs you your best brain in every spot, for the entire session. Every session you sit down without a calibrated system. Here is what the implementation looks like. Not the full system. That is what the collection is for. But the minimum viable version that you can run starting tonight. Pre-session calibration. 7 minutes before you sit down. Not while driving. Not while logging into the client. Not multitasking. Intentional. Separate. 7 minutes where you assess your current arousal level on a scale you have defined for yourself. Identify any emotional charge from outside the session that you are carrying into the game, and run a specific physiological reset that brings your baseline into the optimal arousal window. This is not meditation. This is performance preparation. The same type that Fedor Holtz has described publicly as a non-negotiable part of his session preparation, that Elliot Rowe has documented across hundreds of high-stakes coaching relationships, that every elite performer in every high-pressure domain uses as the foundation of consistent peak output. Reset protocol between significant hands, 5 seconds, no more. A physiological interrupt that clears the emotional residue of the previous hand before the next hand begins. This is not about feeling better. It is about clearing the interference before it compounds. Mid-session calibration check. Every 90 minutes. 3 questions. Is my deliberation speed consistent with where I started? Am I challenging my reads or confirming them? Am I playing range or playing narrative? These 3 elements are the minimum viable architecture. The entry point. Run them starting tonight and feel a measurable difference before the session is halfway through. The full system. Specific calibration techniques. Complete reset protocol. Mid-session adjustment framework. And the post-session review process for identifying exactly where interference 1 is in the mind of a grinder complete collection. 10 ebooks, 1 integrated system. The product designed not to add more knowledge to an already full database, but to train the delivery system that makes what you know show up when the pressure is highest. Collection 2 launching now. Every Collection 1 buyer receives Book 1 free, directly to their email. No countdown. Link in the pinned comment. Let me give you the clearest possible picture of what is actually available to you. Not the inspiring version, the precise version. You have studied this game. You have put in hours, with solvers, with hand histories, with content like this video. The knowledge is encoded. The patterns are recognized. The reads are built from thousands of hands of observation. The understanding is real and substantial. None of that knowledge requires a pill to access. It requires the conditions under which your prefrontal cortex operates without interference suppressing its output. Those conditions are not mystical. They are not mood-dependent. They are not the result of running good or having a lucky day or being on the right side of variance. You have experienced those conditions. The sessions that felt effortless. The reads that landed clean before you could explain why. The decisions that were obvious before the deliberation even completed. The hours that passed without a single moment of hesitation or second guessing. That was 100% of your poker brain. Not a special version of you. Not a version that only exists on lucky days. The version that exists when the conditions are right, when the baseline is calibrated, when the interference is managed, when the system is running as designed. The question is not whether you have it. You have always had it. The question is what percentage of your sessions it shows up in, and what architecture you have built to make its appearance reliable rather than accidental. Be honest with yourself. In your last 10 sessions, how many felt like that? How many sessions did you finish and think, that was the player I actually am when everything works? 2, 3, 1. Now consider what your results look like if that number is 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10. Not because you studied more, not because you ran better, not because your opponents got worse, because the knowledge you already have is delivered by a system that produces the conditions for it to show up consistently. The math is simple. If your current best brain shows up in 2 out of 10 sessions, and a system shifts that to 7 out of 10, you are playing 5 additional sessions per 10 at your peak cognitive capacity. Not with new knowledge, with reliable access to what you already have. That is the real NZT, not a pill that adds capability. A system that removes interference, not a fiction. A protocol built on documented neuroscience, tested in high-stakes coaching environments, refined over thousands of coaching interactions, and designed specifically for the pressure conditions that poker creates. The difference between knowing this and having the system is the difference between the player who occasionally accesses their full brain when conditions happen to align, and the player who builds consistent access into their preparation and treats it as a non-negotiable part of their game. The movie ends with Bradley Cooper having built something permanent. He does not need the pill anymore. He used the access it gave him to create structures, financial, intellectual, cognitive, that maintained the output without chemical dependency. He engineered the conditions that the pill had artificially created, and then he made those conditions his permanent baseline. That is the right frame for what you are building. Not a shortcut. Not a hack. A permanent elevation of your baseline through deliberate systematic architecture applied consistently over time. You are not chasing a feeling. You are not hoping to recreate a lucky session. You are engineering the conditions under which your best poker is the expected outcome, not the exception. Here is your starting point. Tonight, before you sit down to play, stop for 7 minutes. Not while doing something else. 7 deliberate minutes before the first hand. Assess your current state honestly. What is your arousal level right now? Too low, too high, within the optimal window? What emotional charge are you carrying from outside this session? Is your sleep debt significant enough to shift your baseline outside the range where the prefrontal cortex operates at its best? If the answer to any of these is concerning, address it before you play. Not as a philosophical commitment to self-care. Not as a wellness practice. As a strategic decision about whether the hardware is in the condition required to run the software you have spent months building. You can have world-class poker knowledge and run it on a system not in condition to deliver it. The knowledge does not change the output if the delivery system is compromised. And during the session, after any hand that produced significant emotional charge, win or lose, run the 5-second reset before the next hand begins. Inhale 4 counts. Exhale 8. 1 sentence. That hand is information. It is filed. The next hand starts clean. That is the beginning of the system. The full system, with the pre-session protocols, the specific arousal calibration techniques, the mid-session checks, the post-session review process for identifying where interference won, and the complete architecture for building reliable access to your optimal cognitive state is in the mind of a Grinder complete collection. 10 ebooks, one integrated system, the product designed not to teach you what to know, but to train the delivery system that makes what you know show up. Subscribe to this channel. Every video here is designed for this, not to add more knowledge to a growing pile, but to build more architecture. Share this with one player who studies seriously and cannot understand why the results do not match the preparation. The pill does not exist. The protocol does. Your brain is already limitless. It has been the entire time. The interference was never the absence of capability. It was the distance between your capability and your access to it. Now build the system that closes that distance. Now go play.